Brian, good to see you. All right, we have a quorum, so why don't we start at 7:30? We've got a little bit of business to do first, Brian, and then we will turn to you and have your presentation, which we're very excited to have. I think welcome to everybody. If we could just do some quick introductions. When I call out your name, you can say who you are and who you're with. I see some nice guests with us. Brianna, do you want to start?
Sure. So I am Brianna Bennett. I work for the town of Cohasset.
Great. Laura Burns.
I'm Laura Burns. I live in Hingham, and I think I'm with Brianna Bennett. She invited me.
Excellent. Sam Wakeman. You're on mute, Sam. Can you unmute? No? Brianna, can you unmute him?
Yes. Did something pop up on your screen, Sam? Oh, there you go. Sorry. Try it one more time. Hold on. Did you just get a... There you go.
I'm unmuting. I'm Sam Wakeman, Chairman of Capital Budget, and I'm interested in anything where we're spending money in the town of Cohasset.
Or saving money on something that we need to spend.
That's what we hope we're doing. When we're we hope we're spending less than we would have spent on the other alternative.
That is this committee's MO. So Sam, I'm assuming Brian's going to keep us on that track, but we'll find out. Thank you for joining us. Pat Gooding.
Pat Gooding, Vice Chair for the Alternative Energy Committee.
Great. Steve Wenner.
Hi, I'm Steve Wenner, live in Cohasset, member of the Alternative Energy Committee.
We're just doing introductions right now, and we started the meeting at 7:30. Debbie is our secretary, and she'll be taking the minutes. So Debbie, I don't know if you want to say hi, or if I've already given a good enough introduction. Okay, so you're still on mute.
Yeah, there we go. Your introduction was fine, but hello, everybody.
Steve Girardi, I don't see your video, but I see you just unmuted. Welcome.
Hi. I had a long night last night. I don't have my picture face on. I'm Steve, Water Commission engineer at Hingham Light, and I like to hang out with this group.
We like it when you hang out with us.
I know, it's fun.
Okay, Corey Evans, we're just doing introductions, so you've arrived right on time. Do you want to introduce yourself to the group? Corey, can you take yourself off mute?
Still connecting.
I'm sorry, I heard you arrived just on time. I didn't hear my name, so I wasn't quite sure who the introduction was. Just generally speaking, for those, I know most people here, I am Corey Evans, second year member of the Cohasset Select Board, and very passionate about all the work you guys are doing. I've already given Steve more than a piece of my mind today, so I'll keep that to all my comments for the day.
And Mike Schmidt, I don't think you had a chance to introduce yourself.
Signing Mike Schmidt, member of the Alternative Energy Committee in Cohasset, and also Assistant Operations Manager at Hull Light.
Great, thanks, Mike. So Brian, what I'm going to do is ask you to wait on your introduction. There might be a few more people who join us, and so you can give a little bit of your background and introduction when we start your discussion, which should be in maybe a couple of minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, you guys got to do minutes and other fun stuff.
Exactly. Well, we got to do the minutes, and then we get to you, the fun stuff. So everybody should have had a chance to review the minutes. And I think Mike has a change, but I'll open it up to discussion. Thank you, Debbie Cook, again, for such excellent minutes. Does anybody have any comments, edits, suggestions, changes to the meeting minutes from June 10th, 2021?
Yeah, the only thing I had, I wasn't present at the meeting. I had a light board meeting conflict, and I think it has me as being present on the minutes.
You to excused absence because you've reminded me you did let me know in advance. And Tyler Thibault has an excused absence for today, Debbie. He is in the midst of planning for the storm, and Tyler is with Eversource. So anytime there's a big storm, we tend to lose our utility guys for good reason. Are there any other suggested changes or edits to the meeting minutes? Okay, hearing none, we are on Zoom, so we have to do a roll call vote. I'd like a motion to accept the meeting minutes as presented with the change of moving Mike Schmidt to an excused absence. Do I have that motion?
I'll so move.
Thanks, Steve. Do I have a second? I'll second. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor, roll call vote. Tanya Bodell, aye.
Steve Winter, aye.
Debbie Cook, aye.
Pat Gooding abstain. I wasn't present for the meeting.
Mike Schmidt abstain. I wasn't present.
So I don't know if we have enough of a quorum, but let the record show that the people who were in attendance at that meeting and are in attendance here have voted to approve the meeting minutes. Okay, great. All right, next on our agenda is Brian Folds. Brian, thank you for joining us. I'm just going to let you take it away unless Brianna would like to give a little bit of introduction. You've been so great coordinating with us and speaking with us. Brianna, do you want to do a little introduction about how you've come into contact with Brian and then turned over to Brian? How would you like to do?
Well, I'll let Brian introduce himself mostly, but he first reached out to me several months ago when we did the Microgrid Monday series, and so I know he was a great participant in that, and he asked a lot of questions, and he came to multiple webinars, if not all 4 of them. So, you know, yeah, that was really great, and I'm so glad that we were able to connect and that you're here with us to talk tonight. I know you have a lot to share about what Concord's doing, and I don't want to step on your time, so I'll let you take it away.
Sure. So you asked if I could come by and talk about 2 different topics. One was the sustainability in Concord and kind of our history. The other was about school buses. And so tonight, I believe we're doing school buses. So I want to make sure you don't need me to cover both.
Nope, that's great. Yes, please focus on the school buses tonight. And then at our next meeting, we'll talk more in general about the sustainability efforts of Concord.
Okay, great. So I am going to use a past presentation. So am I able to share my screen?
Let me make sure. Does it say you're able to now?
No, host disabled.
Okay. You can share your screen now.
Ah, look at all those controls. All right, great. All right, so you may have seen, I'm going to just move your faces somewhere near the camera so I'm looking at you real quick. But everyone should see the slides. You see a big blue background?
Yep.
All right, so this is a presentation I gave to the town of Concord when asking for $200,000, $150,000 for vehicle to grid infrastructure at our bus depot, and $50,000 to maximize the next round of Volkswagen funding when it comes out. And to give you a little bit of background on me, I am a citizen of Concord. I have been sharing my story about building my house, which is LEED certified, you know, putting on solar panels. I help other residents in quote comparisons and doing things like that. Back in 2014, the town meeting asked the school committee to create a subcommittee to look at alternative drivetrains for their school buses, because people were upset that they just keep buying diesel buses blindly, and wanted someone to prove, or a committee to prove, that really other alternatives were not feasible. So I was on that committee. During that committee, we did a report or a presentation of findings where we looked at all these different fuels, what was available in the market, and we found that there was funding for a electric school bus pilot here in Massachusetts. And we contacted them, and they started the pilot, and we were able to participate. As part of their participation, we received the first electric school bus in the country. And then we ran that pilot for a little over a year, and that bus is still in operation today. That was 2016. I've also been on some climate committees. So the town wanted to look at how, because there was little pop-up sustainability initiatives throughout town from citizen groups that would come to town meeting, and the town wanted to create a framework, as they said, or a way to kind of manage sustainability in a more holistic way. So they formed this task force to do the first gathering of creating a plan. That led to an article at town meeting that not only set goals, but funded a staff person, funded a detailed report following methodologies, and then also created, it was the citizens said that we would like to raise the cost of electricity to do RECs as an offset, as a transition to a portfolio where we actually do power purchases of renewable energies. So all of that happened. And then there was the Climate Advisory Board, which was a follow-up to that, which I was chair on while we wrote the town's climate plan. But getting from my history back to school buses, in the first round of Volkswagen, we were able to, and this is just a slide that kind of goes over that similar history, more detail on school buses. And then this is about the committee and what we wanted to look to. And I can share this presentation so you can click on the links and see the supporting information. But the committee had found that electric school buses had a lot of benefits in lower cost to maintain and operate, lower fueling, but the big barrier was the purchase price. Electric school buses are about 3.5 times more expensive than a diesel at the point of purchase. So that's a huge barrier. You need funding. That's where the pilot funding came in to help us with the first bus, and the Volkswagen settlement funding helped us with the second. This is just a reference to that first bus that we received. And there's multiple reasons why we're doing this. We're doing this to improve local air quality. This is a slide that showed how when everybody gets off the road, NOx emissions disappear. It's transportation that's creating the air pollution around our cities. And you can see that in the picture of LA on the left and the satellite photos from NASA about the average NOx emissions along the eastern corridor of the US and what it was in March of 2020 when everyone was in lockdown. There's a dramatic difference in the amount of pollution that we created once we got those combustion engines off the road. And that pollution has real effects on human health. There are multiple studies that show if you live near a highway, you're more likely to get that PM 2.5 deep into your lungs, which causes lots of issues, cardiovascular issues, pulmonary issues, birth issues. So there's a link there to the EPA report on some of those. And when we talk about climate change, people generally think of, oh, it's going to be a nicer beach day when everything's warmer. But that's not true. Air quality issues, heat stroke, there are real consequences, whether it be ticks will be a big issue in the Northeast because the climate's going to be more favorable to them. There will be, the other quote here is about how climate change is a threat multiplier. This was done by the US military. It isn't the direct cause of a lot of problems, but it makes a lot of problems worse. When water starts to, there's more energy in the atmosphere. So the atmosphere holds onto water longer, making drought areas. And then when it does drop, it drops very heavily, creating floods. This affects our food supply. This affects other characteristics of a stable place to live. And when that stability is gone, people migrate, and that creates conflict. So that was the big finding in that report from the military. And essentially, what is climate change? It is, at its core, a chemistry problem. We've taken geologically sequestered carbon, extracted it from the ground, and put it into the atmosphere, into the biosphere. And the biosphere generally recycles carbon around it instead of putting it back into a geologic storage. So if we stop pulling it from the ground, have better ways of powering our everyday life, which electrification is a great way to get started. And I feel like I'm explaining this to a crowd that already knows it, so I'm kind of going very quickly. But Concord, in that analysis of our strategies, we looked at the carbon intensity of our community, and the best strategy for us is to decarbonize the light plant, which is Concord Light, which is operated here in town. And once we have clean electricity, if we get half the vehicles and half of the heating systems to a form of electric heating and mobility, that's a 60% reduction community-wide of our greenhouse gas emissions. So that is core to what we're trying to do in Concord, is more electric cars, cleaner power supply, and heating. And how does that, I'm linking it back to school buses at this point. So this is part of that study that we did, is we looked at our school bus fleet, which at the time was 36 diesel buses. These are type D, the transit style, the big buses, 80 plus passenger. And that fleet was consuming, on an average over 5 years, over 80,000 gallons of diesel, which led to almost 2 million pounds of greenhouse gas emissions on it each year. And that equated to, oh, I'm going to admit somebody.
Oh, you're fine. I'll take care of that.
Oh, I got it. So that equated to, those 36 buses were 8% of all the greenhouse gas emissions from municipal government. That includes the buildings, that includes the vehicles that are not buses. 8% of all of that was just that fleet. And there's a little chemistry equation down there, because a lot of people don't realize when you combust diesel, you take something that weighs 6 pounds for a gallon and you turn it into something that weighs 22 pounds. And the reason it becomes heavier is because you're using the oxygen in the air. And so even though each molecule is lighter than air and floats around, the total mass is quite large. Go back to. And so this is where the utility and our transportation fleet start to come together. So this picture on the right here is of the bus depot that was constructed in 2017. And you'll notice a big solar array behind it. That's a 5.4 megawatt solar array run by Concord Light. And so that has a direct connection back to the substation. We are looking to do the vehicle to grid here because of that existing infrastructure and that renewable generation. And this talks a little bit about different business models, but you guys, Cohasset, so Hingham is a municipal light plant, but is Cohasset Eversource or?
We're National Grid.
National Grid, okay. So there's different business models for accomplishing this, but I'm going to focus less on the business models and talk about where the value is from doing the technology. And that goes down to the duty cycle of the battery and the transportation. So to read this chart, you'll see in orange, there's the average load for Concord substation. So that's what the town of Concord, their average load is, you know, at 3 to 4 in the morning, it's down around 13, 14 megawatts. But then comes the evening peak at, you know, when everybody's coming home from work, and it gets up to almost 25. And that's kind of the average load profile. Now, the dotted line is the state of charge of the battery pack. And you'll see that when Concord's load is low in the middle of the night, that's when we charge the pack up to full. And the battery pack is 220 kilowatt hour pack for each of these buses. And then you can see at the very bottom, those blocks of green and red. That's when green is when the bus is plugged in and parked. And then red is when it's out picking up kids and bringing them to school, and when they're bringing them home after school is closed. And you can see that the state of charge drops during that red portion. That's when it's out driving around, and then it comes back for a lunch break and then drives around some more. And then it does a little bit of a charge because demand is still relatively low and we haven't hit our RNS charges yet. And so once we start to get into an hour where we could hit those transmission charges, we start to discharge the pack into the grid. So we take that stored energy, and instead of running it through the substation, we get it from the vehicles, avoiding those costs to distribute electricity. And you can see here that it does 73 miles a day for driving around. The discharge rate is 60 kilowatts. So it's not kilowatt hours, it's kilowatts. It's a rate of discharge. So it's you know, significant. It's not level 2, it's closer to the level 3. And this talks about those RNS charges. Here you see that the cost per kilowatt over the years is continuing to climb at a pretty constant rate. And so the way that this fee is collected is like a demand charge for a commercial customer. It's when that substation is experiencing its largest load over the period of 1 month. And that's when you pay these fees. And you can see that period of time on that little black and white chart on the right there shows that generally happens around that 4 to 7 o'clock hour. And you know that it changes with the time of the seasons, but generally that 4 to 7. And then you could see, well, we'll skip the other one because the other load just talks about how solar has knocked it down and made our evening peak more extreme. But the previous slide showed about days when the bus is out driving around town, getting students to and from school. This slide talks about 2 situations where the bus is idle, which school buses are idle for most of their life. Most of their life is spent sitting around the lot waiting for times when school is opening and closing. So Concord has a lot of solar adoption. And so we experience a low load problem, not a peak load, but a low load. So at 1 in the afternoon on a Sunday when it's nice, cool, beautiful weather and it's sunny out, people go off to church and not a lot of people are consuming electricity and solar is booming. And we end up with these low load problems where if we're looking at curtailment or storage for any additional installations of solar. So by having this fleet of vehicles depleted in their packs down to 20%, you're able to consume some of that excess renewable energy being produced in town, allowing you to have soak up that energy and not let it go to waste. But also during the summer peaks, you can see where the load really goes up and everybody's running the air conditioners, and we hit the ISO peak. This is where all of New England is consuming the largest amount of electricity for that single hour of the year. Then we can take these batteries and we can discharge them at that 60 kilowatt rate into the grid, into the distribution grid in Concord, avoiding pulling that through our substation where the fee is calculated. And here's an understanding of what that fee is. So you can see in the middle chart there, those squiggly lines, those are the daily peaks for 3 different years. And you can see those summer months is when you really have those air conditioners click on and click off. And so between June and September is when you're going to experience this highest demand for all of New England. And luckily, kids are out for the summer for most of that time. So those buses are literally sitting in the lot doing nothing as stationary battery packs. And the financial value is in the forward capacity market because you're avoiding these very high fees for consuming during this hour. There's a lot of programs to shave the peak and so forth. They're all trying to reduce this consumption. It's also when all the generators that operate in New England really are running. So all of the clean ones, all of the dirty ones, everybody's trying to produce power. So if we avoid this peak, the marginal energy producers, those peaker plants, those natural gas peaker plants would be the first to be shut off. And pricing for this can be high and low. So it depends on the cycle. So back in 2017, 2016, it was crazy high for the NEMA area. And so if we had avoided those peaks, 4 years or 5 years earlier when our compliance obligation was set, we would have paid less in those particular years. But now you don't know that going forward. So you always want to shave the peak, and that's what these batteries can do. And so what do these systems look like? This is what they look like. You have a bus, you have what's called a PCS, or a power control system. It's about the size of a refrigerator. And this takes the alternating current coming from the grid and transforms it into a DC current to charge the battery pack. And that's what those dispensers do, is there a cord that connects the PCS to the vehicle. And the NUV system can do up to 2 dispensers for 1 PCS, meaning 2 electric school buses can charge off of that 1 unit. And they would do that in series, not in parallel. So charge 1 bus fully, stop, charge the other bus fully. Proterra can offer 4, where you have 4 buses in that 1 PCS, but you do it in series again. So it may take you 3 hours to charge the first one, 3, 3, and 3. So it would take 12 hours for those 4 buses. And feel free to stop me at any point if people have questions, because I could ramble on like this for a while.
Could I ask you a question, Brian?
Yeah.
So this is Corey, and I just that was going to be a question of mine. Is basically you cited 60 kilowatts back to the grid, and that's total for the system, not total for bus. If you're doing this kind of in series model, is that correct?
It's per PCS, so it's the power control units. Right. So yeah. If you have 4 buses and you have the Proterra system with the 4 dispensers and 1 PCS, that system total. Outputs 60 kilowatts. If you have the NUV, it outputs 120 because you've got 2 PCSs with 2 dispensers on each.
Got it. All right, thank you.
Yeah. And so this is the first, because the reason I went for this presentation is based off of the audience. Someone here, I think it was Sam, said he's interested in the capital return on the money, and that's important. And so this presentation was for our financial committee in town for them to review. So I have two tables. I have this slide and a following one. And the first column is just what it costs for the life cycle of a diesel bus. So you purchase the bus around 100,000. There's no incentive support. The infrastructure is a fractional of the diesel fueling infrastructure that was built when the depot was built. And then the cost of fuel over the life cycle of the bus, being 12 years, will be about $82,000 in diesel purchased for that bus. And all the details about, how much per gallon and all of that should be down the bottom. And then the maintenance, and then any grid services, which is a revenue stream for those buses, would be listed. Obviously, diesel doesn't have a revenue stream because it's not doing grid services. And then the residual value is about $6,000 when you sell that school bus 12 years later at the end of its life. And using that as a baseline, you say, okay, well, an electric school bus costs $365,000. That's a lot more than the diesel bus costs at the point of purchase. The first column talks about it without any financial support from incentives. And so the infrastructure is a little higher, and this would be level 2 charging. This is where it's just an electric vehicle. It isn't doing vehicle to grid, and there is no grid services. And then fueling is lower over the life of the bus, and maintenance is lower over the life of the bus. But you don't have any revenue from grid services. You have a higher residual value. This is because you have a residual value for the vehicle itself, and the second life of the battery pack has a high residual value. So you can see that the life cycle cost is higher. It's about 156% of a diesel bus. So it's not a financially good thing to do. It's a sustainably good thing to do, but not a financial without incentives. And then the next column adds in the incentive, but still does the level 2 charging. So there is no grid services. It's just acting as an electric vehicle. That incentive, which is what we received for the bus in the first round of Volkswagen, made a reduction of 36% in the life cycle cost of that vehicle. So getting that Volkswagen incentive made an electric bus cheaper than a diesel over the life cycle. Now we're finally got to it. We're getting to the electric Volkswagen with the vehicle to grid. You'll see that the cost of the bus is a little lower. That's because it's a Thomas bus, and it's the charging infrastructure, the inverter is not on the vehicle, it's off the vehicle with the PCS. And then you have a little bit more funding because it's a percentage basis, and the vehicle costs a little bit more with the charging infrastructure, which is now, instead of $9,000, it's $50,000. That's the cost of that PCS and dispenser versus something like a level 2 charging unit at 80 amps. And then the fueling is the same, the maintenance is the same, but now the reduction of those RNS charges and the reduction of the forward capacity market equates to $147,000 in life cycle value. That's over 12 years for that one bus. And then again, the same residual value after 12 years of 13,000, which makes the point that with grid services and the setup, it's only costs about 20% of what it would cost to do a diesel bus. So you could get 5 electric buses if you can get that big incentive, and for the cost of one diesel. But let's go on to the second slide, which talks about the purchase of 2 buses instead of 1. And I'm sure a lot of you are glazing over this moment. We'll stop and do questions, don't worry. So on this slide, I look at buying 2 electric buses. So if I was to buy 2 diesels, that would be twice the purchase price, twice the infrastructure price, twice the fueling, twice the maintenance, and you end up at the same percentage. With without vehicle to grid, just operating it like an electric vehicle, it can start to go down as long as you get that cap and the Volkswagen settlement. So each community, each round is capped at $500,000. And so the Volkswagen funding support is higher for one vehicle than it is for two. So I think whereas you may get an 80% support on the purchase of one vehicle, you get more like a 69% support on the purchase of two vehicles because you hit that cap and it reduces the per vehicle percentage. And so infrastructure, fueling, maintenance, these are all based on double what was in the previous for just doing one. The residual value is double, and the grid services is still zero because these are simply charging on a level 2 charger. And so you do find financial savings because of that Volkswagen funding for two of these electric school buses just transporting children. But I'm going to skip ahead because I feel I've been rambling on too long, but I'm going to skip ahead to the final column on the right there, which is where we do 2 electric school buses with 2 PCSs and a dispenser on each of those PCSs, so that you can now, you have 100,000 in that investment into 2 PCSs and a dispenser each, but you can double your grid services because your output is higher to avoid those RNS and other fees. So that brings it down to a cost of about 33% versus the 100% cost that you would have with diesel. And I feel I've been rambling at a camera for a while, so please ask some questions. Corey.
I've already asked a question, so Tanya, if you got someone else, I don't want to jump in too many times. Am I good?
Go for it.
Okay. And I guess this is more for the AEC and less so for, it's a great presentation and you're not rambling, you're really clear. So don't worry about that at all. Obviously, since we don't have a municipal light plant, we're relying on different programs, state programs that, National Grid is tied into. I believe in previous meetings, there was discussion about certain caps with certain sizes if we want to do, V2G stuff. Do we have any sensation about, what this 294 number would mean for us since we're not a municipal plant? Anyone on AEC?
So my big suggestion is that is where it gets difficult, because in Concord, the school department owns and operates the fleet. And we, under the town manager, we operate the light plant as a, what do they call it? But all of our program is under the town manager, whether it be the savings seen at the utility. So when I made this presentation, one of the advantages I had was to say, if taxpayers make an investment into the infrastructure at the depot, then ratepayers, which are the same people minus a few houses on the edges of the territory, will see the benefit of lower rates in their electricity. Right. The difficulty you'll have is I don't know if Cohasset operates their own fleet or if they outsource. You've got a school committee, you've then got to talk with the utility, but you're probably going to have to partner with another company to do the grid services to get that revenue. And there's companies like Highland Electric does this. There's a few other players. I'm talking to some people in Rhode Island that are working with National Grid, and they have 4 or 5 companies that are offering this kind of solution, and it's Wild West. It's all different kinds of structures and offers. The industry hasn't come up with a turnkey solution right now.
I can answer just what we're aware of. National Grid does not currently have a tariff that would compensate us for this. It's sort of like the LED streetlights that we we could have installed them, but we would not have gotten any discount until there was a tariff. So National Grid would have to either get a tariff or work with us as part of a microgrid pilot project, which we'll talk about later today. But that said, FERC Order 2222 allows for distribution side resources such as electric buses to bid straight into the wholesale market. And so we could get that capacity market payment directly, but we would probably need to hire a third party provider to help us manage that. And we just don't have the capability in town. So those are all things. You know, I'll also note, just looking at my numbers, taking some of these numbers, unclear if VW settlement money is still available and unclear if we could get it. But I do believe that there is other money out there that we can research and try to get. That said, with the vehicle to grid numbers that Brian has put up, it does look like the electric bus is only 12% more than a diesel bus if you have the vehicle to grid services under their assumptions. And I think that those will continue to go down in cost. So I think we're coming close to parity soon. And I think it's just a question of making sure that we can get the benefits if we were to engage in something like this.
That's the key, is to ensure that the community gets the benefits. As for the prices of the buses declining as they deploy, that was the hope. That is not what I'm seeing. What I'm seeing is prices are remaining high because each state is competing against each other to get these because there's a short supply, so they can mark them up and recoup all their R&D costs. You know, it makes sense, and it's not quite the norm yet. It's not replacing diesel yet. It's still a niche vehicle. Once it stops being niche, that's when you'll see the competitive pricing. Yes, you're going to have to work with a third party. I know companies like Highland Electric will go to a school committee and they will say, we can provide electric school buses at the same budgeted costs that you have for operating diesel. And then the risk is on them to find the funding to overcome that first purchase price, to create the agreements on grid services with the investor-owned utilities. They've done this in Beverly, and I think Arlington is following, and some others. But
hey, Brian, I had a quick question. Mike Schmidt, great presentation, really interesting. With doing the discharging back to the grid, does that have any effect on the warranty of the buses or the maintenance of the buses?
No. So the warranty, we did this back in 2016 when we started working with Lion. The first warranty that they showed us was vehicle miles driven. And we were talking about doing vehicle to grid then, and they realized, well, wait a minute, the odometer is not going to move, but the components are going to get wear and tear. And the agreement we came up with is duty cycles of the battery. So the battery warranty is based on the cycling of that rather than the rolling of the tires.
Okay, excellent. One more question. What's the reception from the school bus drivers? Is it a different experience driving an electric bus compared to a diesel?
It's, yeah, not everybody's up for it. Some people don't want to deal with change. Some are willing to try it, but those that drive it like it. It's different. It doesn't feel the same. It doesn't coast. It has regenerative braking. So when they let off the pedal, it doesn't keep rolling as a heavy mass. It starts to slow itself down and put energy back into that battery. Some of those sensations, but all the controls are laid out the same. I mean, anyone who could operate a diesel bus can jump into an electric bus and operate it. Just, it won't be exactly the same. It will have some differences.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
Brian, Pat Gooding, I have a question for you.
Sure.
I know in your attached videos that were sent out in advance, you started with the Lion bus and then you moved to the Thomas, right, for the second vehicle?
We actually came back to another Lion, which was surprising. So we taking the first bus in the US, we went through the early adopter issues. My town manager pulled me aside and said, Brian, I don't mind being cutting edge, but I don't want to be bleeding edge. And I said, sorry, you're bleeding edge on this one. And that was the expectation I set. And that's the pilot. The fact that that bus is still operating and on the roads in Concord is because the mindset then was, this is a prototype that we want to get to work. And it wasn't overly ambitious. It wasn't pie in the sky. It's going to solve all of our problems. And with that expectation set, we worked through those issues. Lion learned a lot. And we brought the bus back to Canada for some refitting because it was it was under the first 25 that came off their production line. So after they had done hundreds of these buses, these electric buses, I mean, they've done, a good, well over 1,000, maybe over 5,000 now. They've done a lot of those buses. So we brought it back up to Canada for them to kind of do a full work through on the bus to get it up to their current specs. That was 1.5 years ago, and we've had almost no issues since then. I think we had a water pump or something like that fail. It's been pretty well operated.
Now they have a facility in Albany that does that also do the maintenance if you need it?
We have our own trained. We've trained our mechanics. They can work on just about everything but the real high voltage stuff, and we haven't had any issues with that. So all the maintenance has been done here. One big advantage of that is we ran into issues where something like that little pump would fail. We'd request the part from Lion. Lion would ship it in a day or two, and then for 2 to 3 weeks it gets stuck in customs. And the bus would be off the road and not operating, and we'd have to fill it in with a diesel and keep the fleet going. With that Albany location, those problems are solved, which is something we pushed heavily for. Because the first place they opened up was in California, because that's where the big money is for them.
Thank you.
Stephen, you have a question?
Yes, I'm just curious. Do you include the cost of money in these figures here? Because the purchase price is right up front and the other is distributed out over the 12 years. So
it's a simple calculation. It's not cost of money.
Okay.
Well, let me do this. Let me close this presentation, and I have another one that I showed to the state, which is less about finances, more about operating. So let me share that, and I'm just going to quickly go through the slides, and if something is of interest to anyone, we can talk more about that. All right, can you see the presentation? Okay, I got some nods of yes. All right. This is about the committee, my history, the layout of Concord. Again, this is kind of like a timeline of how we got to electric buses. And I can, if these weren't in the agenda links, I can provide this if you need. What were the goals of that committee? It was to, the health impacts on kids, lowering the total cost of operation, and reducing greenhouse gases. Again, that's about the fleet. Again, that's about emissions. These are some of the fuels we looked at. So we looked at everything from different petroleum-based products like diesel, biodiesel, propane. We looked at electric. We looked at CNG. We looked at hydrogen, found out that can't go through the tunnels in Boston, so those are pretty easy elimination. We looked at biofuels. We looked at some flywheel systems and kinetic and others. But in the end, electric tended to be the solution for us. And this was some of what the committee did, is again using diesel as our baseline. You can see the first one are mined resources. That's in the black column. The greenhouse gases emitted from the fuel would be in red, And then the cost per 100 miles as a cost estimator for the fuel was given. And you can see some up at the top there. That's the relative purchase price, the cost of infrastructure as a relative comparison to the cost of diesel infrastructure, maintenance relative to diesel, and the 5-year, shoot, I've forgotten what that is. I wrote that in 2015. So, but you can see little percentages at the top of those green bars. That is the volatility in the price of a unit of that fuel. So you can see here, this is the cost of fuel over time for different fuels. So electricity down the bottom there, very stable. It's a slowly climbing cost. It's you know, relatable to the cost of, you know, the consumer price index. It's just something that creeps up over time. And this is because electricity can be made from many different fuels. So if one fuel becomes expensive, well, then you make electricity from a different fuel. Whereas diesel comes from oil and petroleum. So you can see diesel, biodiesel, propane, they all kind of have the same jigs and jogs. That's because of the price of a barrel of oil. And then CNG, you can see, is a little bit more stable because it isn't affected by the world market as much. But the whole point of the slide was to say, if we budget the cost of fuel for electricity for buses, that budget can apply year over year. It isn't going to be a school committee going, oh my God, we got to take education funding away because the price of a gallon of diesel went from $2 to $3 and we have to find, you know, 100 grand out of our budget. One of the recommendations was B20 because there's really no additional cost. It's really about sourcing that fuel. But B20 is the same price as diesel. B100 or 100% biodiesel tends to have a premium price to it. A lot of our buses were dying because the rust from footwells and battery boxes. So simply washing the salt off on the winter once a week would extend the lives of our buses. Electric buses, this was, you know, an 80-20 fleet. So the idea would be 80% electric, 20% diesel. And this would be because we want that flexibility. We know we can go anywhere in the country with a diesel bus and find a place to fill it. Not all CCS charging stations are going to be able to accommodate, you know, a big long school bus in the shopping center or wherever they may be located. Again, we did the first one. This talks about the concept of vehicle to grid. Let's see, specifics. This is about the RFP process specs. This was the locations that we had installed chargers and what kind of charging units we've done. Being first means that you have every school bus inspector at the state when you get your first bus inspected. We had 36 guys or people, inspectors, running around this vehicle. We had interesting issues, like there's a mandate that there's a lockout system on buses that have wheelchairs, and it's because you're idling the diesel engine to create electricity to operate the lift, and the driver has to be away from the controls. Well, an electric school bus, there's no connection that way. There's always electricity available. There's no lockout system needed, so the manufacturer didn't build one. And then we had to look at all the inspectors said, it's a stupid rule in this application, but it's a rule. And so we had to go through the state to get that resolved before we got passed in our inspection. This goes to your someone's question about drivers and how they felt about it. You know, you could see looking at the picture there, it's very much like a normal bus. It's not alien. It's not, you know, and they did favorably look upon it. But the school bus union has a prior, you know, the people who've been in the union longer get priority on which bus they want to drive. So, you know, not all drivers were able to get access because someone more senior would get the bus. Events and awareness, the community loves the bus. So it's interesting, it's different, it's quiet. The bus sings, so it makes the sound of the Montreal subway below 20 miles an hour. Because electric buses are silent, we want people around the vehicle to know when it's going to be in motion. We don't want to play a song like the wheels of the bus go round and round because we don't want to attract the kids to the sound. We want to just let them know it's there, kind of like a diesel engine is always rumbling, so you know that vehicle's on and ready to move. Again, this is just the—
Brian, why does it have a tailpipe?
Oh, where's the first bus that we have has a tailpipe, the second will not. So I think, yeah, you see right there.
One of the questions that to expect is, why does it have a tailpipe?
Yes. So the bus and the Pilot has a range of 75 miles, and it's a lithium phosphate battery. So we didn't want to use the limited amount of energy in that pack to heat the cabin. And so that is a diesel furnace. So we use about, I think it's, I don't know, a gallon or two a day, or a gallon and a half or so a day when operating in the winter, just for space heating. But man, it gets hot in there in the winter. I mean, you can really heat it up. And that extends the range. Now this bus has a range of 75 miles. The bus that we're getting this summer has a range, I think we bought the 125 mile range, but they go up to 155 miles range. So if we have a 70, 80 mile daily route and it's cold and we lose 20 or 30% of the pack's energy for heating, the space heating, that's okay with 120 miles of range. It's not okay when you have 75 miles and you have a 73 mile route.
And Brian, I hate to cut the conversation short. I do just want to jump in and let everyone know it's just about 8:30.
Well, I'm eating up all your time.
You're fine. I mean, this is an amazing presentation. We're so glad you're here. I just wanted to jump in and let everyone know, you know, if you have a final question that you want to ask, you'd be prepared to ask it. And if we could wrap up in the next, 5 minutes, that would be wonderful. I also, if you're willing to put your contact information in the chat, I'm sure people would love to reach out and ask additional questions.
So this is an interesting slide, real quick, because this is the depot maintenance building itself on the left, and you can see the charging of the electric school bus mixed with the building on the right. We had the circuit for the charger separately metered by Concord Light so that we could see what the effect the bus had on the new building. Partnerships, yeah, that's about it. So I'm going to stop, and anyone have any final questions?
So just a quick question. So Brian, where are you now? What portion are electric versus diesel? Is that still the 80-20?
That's the goal. I wish we had 80 already. But I've made a promise to the town and the school department that I would not put any kind of mandate that they buy electric at a premium. And so it's all about that purchase price and finding ways to reduce that. So we got the bus and the charger for the Pilot for free from the state. We had put in a lot of time and built the infrastructure to install the charger. This summer, we're getting our first Volkswagen settlement bus, which was based on those numbers. And we're going to do Chapter 70, which is the regional school district. The the state provides 80% support for regional school districts for pupil transportation. So we're going to use that to get another electric school bus. And then we've already, with town meeting, ensured that we won't take away from the school budgets to maximize the second round of Volkswagen and get 2 more. And we've also secured $150,000 to build the conduit and the pads and everything. And the interconnection will be a question, but all the curbs and bollards ready for the PCSs to go in with the purchase of each of the buses. That's where Concord is right now.
Could I grab one more from you, Brian?
Yeah.
Have you found some sort of best practice number for, I don't know what to call the metric, but like driving days? Because I'm considering, okay, you've got a battery pack, you've got an adjustment for winter. Obviously, you said 20-25% reduction because of obviously all the reasons, electricity and heat and all these kind of things. And then I'm also thinking in my head, accounting for the random, overnight that the buses don't have power. So is there a metric where we say, okay, you really need to have enough power to have 2 days of bus travel minus a 25%? Is there some best practice number that we want to aim for, if that makes any sense?
So my thinking has been not so much about a power cut, because I've focused on finding a vehicle that can do the daily route with an extra 25-30% for that range loss in the winter. That's what we need. So the big expense with these vehicles is the battery. And so, for example, our pilot bus came with 4 battery modules. It had space for a 5th, but that would be $32,000 just for that 5th module to get the range to closer to 100 miles. Same thing with the ones that are being offered now. The range is like I think 100 and 120 and 135 and 155. But each
use
time,
size for just 1 day of use, basically.
Yeah. So if you want 20 more miles of range, that might cost you $35,000 in the purchase price.
Tipping point. Yeah.
So you gotta kind of balance that. I think if there was ever a power cut for multiple days, the buses would have some energy on them. But you wouldn't be able to continue normal operations. But then again, if the town's out of power, normal operations aren't going to happen anyway.
Happens very often here, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh, it is? All right. So that's the great thing about an MLP is we have great resiliency. We rarely, Laura's
salt in the wound. Salt in the wound.
I'm sorry, man. But one of the other things is the Clinton Global Initiative has a great little video where these school buses in a disaster situation can be a source of charging for phones. Like you can deploy these buses across town as little mini shelters. So you have heat, you have a way to charge your phone. So should there be a big storm that goes through town, you could distribute these buses so that neighborhoods would have a place. It's kind of like a mobile generator on wheels is the concept. So there's a lot of ways you can kind of meet needs. Like you can actually hook these, if you design the building, you can actually hook these batteries up to the building and it will act like a generator and power that building for a while. But again, it does require some forethought and planning for those kind of aspects.
Thanks, Brian.
Brian, that is very interesting because in fact, the town of Cohasset has a study that is almost done, being done on a grant funded by the Mass CEC to look at exactly that, how to use school buses combined with our solar energy array and the current DPW site to create that type of mobile resiliency.
Well,
so we're looking forward to the results.
I'll stop talking now, let you go on with the meeting, but I'll put in the chat my contact information and the link to that YouTube video from the Clinton Global Initiative so you can get that sense.
If anybody has questions, please, we can contact Brian. Brian, thank you so much. This has been so helpful, so informative, so inspiring, and we appreciate the time.
I'm amazed I'm still awake. I've been up since 6 and doing meeting after meeting, so I get to go to bed.
If everybody take off your mute and let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I hope this was helpful.
That was very helpful. All right. Well, you're invited to stay, but I can imagine your bed is calling you. So good night. And thank you again. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you and what Concord is doing. Brianna, you're up next. Do you want to chat about our web design and content?
Yes, so really briefly, I just want to say there's going to be a redesign for the entire website of Cohasset this fall, and we've added a lot of content and links to our website over the past several months. And so between now and the next meeting, please look over the website and just email me with your feedback if you have any.
Do you have a pen and paper?
We will do that. And then you're still up for the data statistics on EV charging.
Yes, now this is so exciting. We have data on our electric vehicles. So I'm here to say that based on the data we found recently, Cohasset has 23 electric vehicles registered in the town and 85 hybrids. So that's a total of 108 semi and fully electric vehicles. This is lower than we were anticipating, but we're waiting on further data for the RMV that'll help us confirm these numbers and make sure that they're completely accurate. We were able to find the information eventually. This is just very exciting that we were able to get this.
Great.
For the charging stations as well, I have the updates on the numbers for June. So there were 121 sessions in April, as we know, 141 sessions in May, and 156 sessions in June. So it's continued to increase. When it comes to unique drivers, there were 39 unique drivers who used the stations in June, which is a 3-car decrease from May, which had 42 unique drivers. But those 2 months are still the highest months that we have seen when it comes to that over the past year. I'm sorry, it's loud where I am at this very moment. In April, we had 30 unique drivers, so it has increased dramatically still. We'll have to see if May's threshold of 42 is going to get broken in July, or if we've begun to see usage start to level off. In the last 30 days, the town has dispensed 1.86 megawatt hours of electricity at a rate of 12 cents per kilowatt hour. That's approximately $223. This is the most energy consumed by the stations within a 30-day period. So by month, the total consumption of energy is in megawatt hours, 1.83 in June, 1.49 in May, and 1.08 in April. So you can kind of see how that's increased. And to date, the town has avoided 9,298 kilograms of greenhouse gas emissions, which is equivalent to planting 238 trees and letting them grow for 10 years. My favorite statistic of the month. And that's it on that. And then I'll speak on the 2021 initiatives, but I can answer any questions first.
Yeah, I've got a question for you, Brianna. Could you write a short report on how you cracked this nut here and figured out how to get these figures? There's a lot of other towns on the South Shore that would like to do the same thing. And I'm thinking in particular Hull. And they're running into the same sort of difficulties you've had, and you've obviously figured it out. So please share your solution with us.
The solution is that the town uses ChargePoint, and they provide us with a whole dashboard with all sorts of different statistics, and it's constantly monitoring every time a car plugs in. And so once we actually start charging at the stations too, we're going to get even more detailed information. I'm excited because we can track our information over the past year. So when it comes to October and November, we're going to start to be able to report on annual data. And so I highly recommend, ChargePoint has been really great to work with over the last year, but I'm sorry. Yes,
I'm referring to the number of electric vehicles. How'd you get that number?
Yes, so we went back to the assessor's office, which is where we started. I was having a conversation though. The data is, we eventually asked them to give us everything they had, and Michelle was able to get somehow this perfect spreadsheet that no one thought existed, and I was able to cross-reference every single car and tell whether it was an electric vehicle or not and get the numbers, and so you know, the RMV has told us that I think in the coming weeks, we're going to be getting all of Massachusetts and their counties updated on the EV hub. So hopefully other communities are going to have a much easier time very soon. But in the meantime, they should go to their assessor's office and see if they can get raw data and just keep pushing. It was like a matter of just asking enough times, I suppose. Yeah,
I don't know. I know the people in Hull have tried to do this, and they keep getting the runaround from the assessor's office saying that information is not available, or so.
Yeah,
I don't know.
They need to threaten to show the excise tax form, which has that information on it, because that we were threatening to do that, and all of a sudden it miraculously appeared.
Yep.
Well, okay. If I find somebody who wants to try to get that information from their tax assessor's office, I'll send them to you.
Okay. And Corey?
Yeah, I love the diving into this charge point data. So my apologies to asking crazy questions, but do we have stats on average, charge time or charge kilowatts to kind of see, are we mainly charging plug-in hybrids or EVs? Are people using this as charge while you're there, or are they using it for a full top off? Do you have any kind of style of use information?
Yes, I can get you more specific numbers, but most of the usage is coming from less than 3 hours of charging.
Okay.
Only like 2 stations are used in the town for heavy charging, which would be over 6 hours. But most of the time, cars are plugged in for less than 3 hours at a time. I would have how much energy exactly is expended.
That'll change recently. That's fine. I'm guessing the ones downtown are the most used, or if we obviously take out the ones for town hall that the town uses, do we have a sensation about which ones are used most by the public?
So I can only speculate because it doesn't specify on the main charts. I might be able to go into the individual stations and get that information for you. But, my assumption is that the town vehicles that charge off electricity are plugged into the 2 stations at the recreation center most of the time, from what I can tell. So I believe that those are probably the ones with heavy charging. Just because every time you go to certain stations, including the town hall, but also the recreation center, they're almost always
there's a leaf
parked there.
Right. And there's no way to cross. My last question is, since you figured this out, is there any way to cross charging stations with vehicles? My curiosity is, I know we have 30 some odd unique charging profiles or unique vehicles, but I'd love to know how many unique households that is, because I know that EVs, it seems in town, travel in pairs. So there's a lot of families that have more than one EV. So I'm also curious to see how many families this is affecting. So
it's a good question. I will have to see. I don't know if, for privacy reasons, I don't think that ChargePoint will give me more specific than how many unique drivers there are.
No, they probably shouldn't, right? So.
But we can tell. I mean, based on the data we've gotten, I'm sure a lot of them are from the same households. But also a good number of them must be people that live outside of the town, because there's only 20, I just reported on the number, I believe 23 electric vehicles, fully electric, in the town. So the fact that we're getting, 42 unique drivers is really interesting. I don't know how many hybrids are charging at these stations, but I believe a good number of them are probably coming from out of town.
But we have not yet validated the data. Like, we don't know if the total of what we've gotten from the assessor's office equals the total from the DMV registered in Cohasset. So we're still doing validation. It just may be that for whatever reason, the assessor's office gave us partial data. It looked low to me, but we're still finalizing it. The good news is we did get a spreadsheet with data after a long quest. So the quest is almost done. And good job, Brianna, as always, for everything you do.
Thank you. Good to Michelle. I wish she was here to take the real congrats for being able to go back and get the final spreadsheet from the assessors. Any other questions on that?
A question about, so where these chargers are hooked into, are these behind demand meters? So like I know the ones at the library, is that on a demand tariff? You may not know now, but it could matter if, you know, we're adding, you know, 2 or 3 cars are hooked up. You could be adding, you know, 20 kW of demand during a high use period. That could really affect your bill. I know in Hull, we gave out free chargers, but we limited the level 2 usage or the charge rate between 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. to lower the demand on our system. So that's another option to look into if we want to try to lower demand on those meters. But it all depends if where they're connected into is behind a demand meter. So it's some information to look into.
So at this time, I'm 99% certain that there's absolutely no limits established on the stations because they don't charge for anything. I don't think anyone knew to set limits because this is so new in Cohasset. So I think that's something that when we establish prices at the end of the summer, we'll want to establish limits. And I'll reach out to you and as well as Steve Girardi about that.
Yeah, anytime.
Is that it?
Okay. Any other questions? If not, Brianna, I think I should have organized the agenda a little bit better, but you're on a marathon roll. So if you could keep going on the 2021 initiatives update.
Yes, so with the grants, I'd just like to say that FEMA on June 30th actually released the fiscal year 2020's BRIC grant sub-applications that were selected for further review. So more information is going to be released on that through the summer, and they'll release the actual awards closer to the fall, but we can start to look through it and see which projects received funding and which did not. Even though the official awards haven't been given out, it's the ones that are selected for further review. So 991 sub-applications requested funding with the BRIC grant, and 406 have been selected for further review. So that's about a 41% acceptance rate to the second phase. And if the committee's interested, I can deliver a more detailed report at our next meeting when those details are released. But no official timeline has been released for fiscal year 2021, so I don't have anything on that. We're confirming that the timeline is going to follow the same path it did for fiscal year 2020, which would mean the application would open at the end of September. And just so everyone's aware, the FEMA BRIC grant is the mitigation grant we're pursuing so that we can put battery storage systems in town to accompany our solar.
And we can also, based on the Mass CEC study, ask for funding tied to school buses, for example, and possibly even cover an incremental cost of a school roof replacement. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we can ask for, and they said go big or go home. So we should think about what we want. Is it confirmed that there is funding for 2021? Or was this a one and done type of thing?
It's a great question. They haven't posted documents where I can say whether it's confirmed or not. So I'm gonna figure out the confirmations very soon.
But you've talked to them, right?
Yep.
As part of 2020. And
yes.
they thought,
oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, they thought they would have funding. I thought they had said, but.
Yes, because we were told to wait until the next funding period when we tried to apply last year.
Any questions for Brianna on grants? And then Mass CEC, are we getting those reports soon?
Yeah, I just talked to Ryan Fox yesterday on that. So GE has submitted both draft reports to Mass CEC for their review. And the Mass CEC team communicated to them that since July is a busy month and a lot of people are away, it might take additional time to get the comments back. He said that they anticipate having the comments back in the next couple of weeks though, and that means that the final report will still be submitted by the end of July. Once the final report is submitted, we can expect a presentation to be set up in early August with their team about their findings.
Are we able to give comments on a draft? Do they want us to review a draft to give comments?
Not from what I can tell. I'll ask Ryan if he wants to have one more meeting where we can review it. But from my understanding, we'll have the opportunity to comment when they give the presentation of their final findings.
But if it's final, it's final. Can you, I would recommend to Ryan that we definitely want to see a draft because we plan on using these studies for the next round of grants.
Okay.
See if they're amenable to that. Okay. Any other questions on grants for Brianna? All right, Brianna, thank you so much for that update. I don't know if there's any update on some of these, so I'm just going to run through. And if you're the champion on these, let us know, and no pressure because we're just keeping it going and keeping the updates. Community solar, Steve?
No update.
Okay. And electric buses, we just had the presentation. We're going to canoodle on this a little bit more and think about how we might be able to get some incremental funding. Interestingly enough, if you use storage as part of a solar project, you can get the investment tax credit of 22%, which could more than cover the incremental cost if we had a vehicle to grid solution. So I think the numbers could make sense even without additional funding. But this is the speech today was, or the presentation today was part of the ongoing research, but there's still more pencil sharpening and calculations for us to do and information to gather. Okay, electric municipalization. We have a subcommittee, but have not, I don't think the subcommittee has met yet, but we'll aim to get something, I think, by September.
Yeah, on that, did we submit a request for funding for some help with that? I think there was some discussion about that at one point in terms of getting consultant or.
Yes, so there supposedly is money in the town budget that was approved at town meeting for us to hire a consultant on that. And I think it's just up to the committee to determine what are the questions we want to ask and the type of consultant, and then whether or not we need an RFP or can just hire somebody who has that capability.
I know I missed the meeting, but I'd really love to be involved with that committee. I don't know if there's any possibility of adding an additional member, or if you guys need help, I'm happy to help.
yes, and yes. Note for Corey, so Tyler and Adam are not renewing their term, and in Tyler's case, he has to resign because of other time commitments, but he is still interested in participating, just not as a committee member. So he, I think, was the official chair. He would still participate on that committee, but not as a chair because he's not a member of the Alternative Energy Committee. So Mike, not to put you in the spot, but most certainly you can be on the committee. And I think when that committee meets, we need to think about who would be the leader, because it should be an Alternative Energy Committee member. And Corey, I mentioned this to you because it'd be good if we got 2 more members. Fortunately, both Adam and Tyler agreed to remain on the committee until replaced, which is what the term should be. But I don't want to, extend too long. So I'll put in a note to Diane that we need to get 2 more members assigned.
Do you want us to send out some flares, or do you have some residents in the wings that you've already spoken to, Tanya?
Send out the flares. I think even if we have residents in the wings, and we did get a lot of interest last time, and there has been some, I think we need to go through the process, but more importantly, sending out the flares can get us to the next round.
We've had a lot of residents apply for the school facilities committee. Obviously, that's a committee that there's more applicants than there are seats. There are certainly more than a few that were very facilities minded and had some expertise in that area. So in the back of my mind, I was kind of flagging them for AEC. So loop you in offline on that. I think we got some good candidates.
So town hall, I don't know, Brianna, or anybody else, if there's an update on town hall. Obviously, there was money allocated and approved at the town meeting. Do we know what the process is or what's going forward on that?
I can maybe fill you in a little bit on that, Tanya. Capital budget has become concerned as a committee about the cost of town hall and a lot of numbers that are being thrown around very loosely that will reduce the cost of town hall. One of those being geothermal, which conceptually looks like a good idea, but there's nothing hard and fast. The other would deal with the number of potential grants that we might be able to get, but nobody's applied for them, nothing's firm. So we're sort of in never land. I am trying to put together a meeting of the, I don't know how you want to phrase it, the minds, the select board, the advisory committee, CPC, and so forth, and the town manager to zero in on what is our actual funding going to be. In other words, the total cost of the project, reductions or contributions in funding from various sources, and where we might end up in the end. And hopefully we can get that done before the end of July, and it'll give us a better idea of the direction from an overall basis. But anything that anybody has an idea of for energy reduction or available energy grants, we'd be very interested in finding out about.
Brianna, I know you've sort of been tracking this. Have you done any research into some of the geothermal grants or any of the energy resources we might be able to get some grant funding for?
Well, we have geothermal's the one we've done the most work on. Brian Host is our resident expert on that. And that's sort of awaiting a couple of returns at this point. So I think we've maybe got that well in hand. If there are any other, reductions like types of furnaces that might yield specific savings, or HVAC systems that would have better savings, window systems that would have better savings, we don't have any specifics on yet, but those are all on our radar screen.
Well, Sam, on the brick grant through FEMA that we mentioned earlier, and we're just, they're ending that cycle. And so it may or may not start up again according to last year's schedule. As I said, the conversations that Brianna has had with them and Michelle had with them was go big or go home. So I think the geothermal system would be one of those things from a reliability and resiliency point of view, as well as renewable, that could be part of a broader package. When we talk about the microgrid,
right,
it's just, we could build it into that without being greedy.
The town hall building committee has been looking at this point.
Okay. So we could, we do have there's a lot of different pieces that we can put together as part of that bid. And this could be definitely part of that. It'd be nice if there was some type of theme around it. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the microgrids. So things are still consolidating, but let's definitely, I think, have a conversation with Brian once we figure out what we're doing for the brick grant and include that in.
Okay.
and try to get full funding from a reliability resiliency point of view.
Yeah, I was hoping he'd be here tonight, but he's not, so I will relay that to him. Too many Zoom meetings, maybe.
Okay. Any other questions on town hall or updates on the town hall?
Yeah, Sam, is anybody looking into air source heat pumps for heating and cooling?
On the what?
Air source heat pumps for heating and cooling in the proposed new town hall.
I can't tell you that. The architects involved in it have been very, very helpful and very positive, willing to look at anything. I can certainly bring it up to them. We're not far enough along with specific systems, so to speak. We're still talking in pretty big generalities. I will make a note on that.
That has popped up.
I'm
in
just
some of the
thinking it
town
might be
committee
more
meetings.
cost effective than the geothermal, but you know, somebody would have to do that analysis.
Yeah.
Well, part of that depends on how much grant money you get. If we could get the geothermal fully funded, it might be more cost effective than even heat pumps.
Also, the geothermal can have substantial energy savings in the future. So you have to look at what it costs you now, what grants might reduce it, and then what's your potential energy saving down the road.
So I'm just concerned a little bit because it seems like maybe I'm not understanding things, but as far as designing this, it almost seems like, because things like geothermal heat pumps and things like, you know, heat pumps and things like that, air source, they've got to be designed early on. It's not something that you can design the building and then bring them in, as opposed to more of a conventional system. So it seems to me like those kind of decisions should be made very early on in the final design phase, because you can't put them just anywhere. They've got to be in a venting situation and everything like that. So so it feels like that should be decided very soon if you're going to be doing that.
Well, I would agree with you, Debbie. And I think the architects are on it, but they haven't gotten as far as getting specific yet. We're still in generalities. That's the best way I can express it. The looks of the building tend to be more important than the mechanical functions.
Oh dear.
I know. What else is new?
Everybody picks the color of the car first, and then they start looking at the functionality. I think, Debbie, we're still early enough. I think we're still early enough.
Because they have more constraints.
We haven't reached a point where we're in trouble on it at all.
Yeah.
We have to go back.
Yeah. I mean, that is one. I have them and I'm going through the process of getting more installed, and there's a lot of considerations about them.
There are.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sam, for the update. And if, Corey, we did get somebody who has facilities background, they could be our liaison for the town hall and maybe be able to provide some insight. The capability right now is not on this committee to provide building design or building energy system advice. Thank you, Sam. But that's a great lead in, Debbie, for you on Go Electric.
Well, I am hoping that at our next meeting, I'm going to have some really, you know, we're at the cusp of making some being able to go forward. I think the website is almost ready for prime time, and we are, you know, going to have a meeting on Tuesday and start our multiple committees heading out and getting stuff done. So I should have quite a bit more to report. If anyone's interested and wants to see the website so far, I can send them, I can send them a link. It's not live, but if you'd like to see where we are and give me feedback, I would love that. So I'll send it to you, Tanya, and if anybody, and if you want to forward it to the committee or whatever.
That'd be great. And I can definitely do that. Good. Thank you for the update. Any questions for Debbie? Okay, so we're moving to the next set of initiatives, updates on our 2020 initiatives. Solar energy RFP, I can give an update on this. Of all of the sites we've looked at, the furthest along, we are in the queue for a couple. The furthest along for which we've received feedback is the school roofs. If you recall, we were hopeful that maybe we could have the school roofs replaced early, and then the state guidance came out that was very clear: if your roof wasn't built before some date, forget about it. And our roofs were built after that date. So part of our challenge is thinking about how do we look at the school roofs if we can't get state funding. And since state funding can be 40 to 60%, it's a big chunk. It is possible that if we are replacing the roofs early as part of a solar project, that we could get 22% of the cost covered by the federal government under the investment tax credit program. So if roofs are being replaced as part of a solar energy array, you could get the 22%. That still doesn't cover what we would lose from the state. And that may be why we include school roofs as part of a brick grant, go big or go home collection of funding opportunities to help cover that incremental 28%, say, that would get at least the equivalent of a 50% share by the state. And in reality, the state tends to give us, I think, maybe 40%. So we could do better than what we could get by the state through federal funding opportunities. If we also did that, the 50% that the town would pay for would go a long way in our 25% funding match. And I think there could be some additional savings tied to lower maintenance over the next 5 years that could help to support an accelerated capital replacement program. These are still, Sam, before you start getting concerned, these are still very high level. And what we do know for sure is that as of this year, we cannot get the roofs replaced early, which is too bad, because that school roofs were some of the best energy savings opportunities with the lowest controversy associated with the solar energy arrays from the bids that we received. The other insight we did get by going down that path, however, and it could impact all of the sites, is National Grid came back and for a 500 kilowatt system, and this is tiny, the school roof system of 500 kilowatts. It's a small system. It's the size of what's on our old landfill. That 500 kilowatt system at Osgood and Deer Hill would have interconnection costs of $500,000. And this is shocking. And those $500,000 of interconnection costs are not behind the meter at the school. It's not on Sawyer Street. It's not in town. It's up at Norwell, the Norwell substation. None of this makes sense to any of us. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to Steve Girardi. It doesn't make sense to Mike Schmidt. It doesn't make sense to Tyler. And so we have gotten in contact at National Grid to understand what is the basis for this common cost of the interconnection. Because the problem is, if it's going to cost us $1,000 per kilowatt to do upgrades up in Norwell to be able to put a tiny little system on our town, that kills the economics for every solar energy array that we can possibly consider, whether it's the MBTA, whether it's the school roofs, whether it's the carports, anything. So I'm not I think the good news is because Select was aggressive in putting ourselves in the queue and going through the interconnection process, we did get this information back from National Grid. So we are trying to understand where this comes from, because it just seems completely unjustified. And I don't know, I've copied our Brain Trust on this. I don't know if our Brain Trust has any other insights on this.
No, this is Steve. I actually think it's just a way for them just to quote unquote have an excuse to do a free upgrade on our dime, because the device they're looking to put in has nothing to do with distribution. One relay does, that's 10 grand tops. The other stuff is probably old. Actually, you could see from the street in Norwell, they're probably really old, they're probably chipped. And like, hey, if they're gonna do this, we need this, you know. But I actually know the prices of what they're putting in, and I got a price for our substation. It was like $15,000 for 3 of them, so $200K for it. I don't know where they're coming up with that money, but it's quite interesting, you know. But we can dive deeper with the distribution engineer over there and kind of work our way through the channels, because the system is so small. The energy coming out of those schools, they're gonna stay locally. They're not even gonna get even close to being backfed to the station, and there's not enough solar in town that even gets backfed to the Noel station. That's my 2 cents.
And how does that affect the numbers? Is there a possibility of just doing like a microgrid between the schools and using the generation that comes from those arrays to, offset the cost on the use of the high school, middle school? I mean,
that's how it's designed. That's why this National Grid interconnection charge makes absolutely no sense, because as Steve said, most of that energy is going to be used by the schools, and whatever's not used by the schools is going to be used by the town. It's not going to backfeed up to Norwell. So it is nothing beyond ridiculous. But we're exploring it.
You're required to connect to the utility regardless. So you can't do a self-contained nano grid type of situation.
So if we wanted to do a self-contained nanogrid situation, we have to be connected to the grid. And that means that the system would impact the interconnection. And that's where National Grid comes in. Even if we had a battery, because we're going to have backup power from the grid, National Grid has the ability to do this interconnection cost. But it has to be directly related to the project. And I think, as Steve says, it's very clear that not only are the prices inflated, but it's almost like they added 2 zeros that shouldn't be there. It's amazing.
It seems to be contradictory to them wanting to incentivize things like this from happening. And I hope that subsequent discussions bear some fruit, let's say.
Like, if everybody remember, like, actually, there's one thing. Actually, 2 things. Actually, even if we do the electric school buses, we're going to run the same issues. But I know Tanya, she was with me on the Palmer Capital, is that, Scott Kaplan, Gordon, they lucked out because the Cohasset golf course ran 3-phase, and they avoided, what was it, like $180,000 of upgrades? Do you remember that, Tanya?
Yeah, we did. We did.
So they lucked out, and this one it's pretty sad. $200,000 is actually $500,000, right, for the 2 sites?
Yeah.
That's the cost of a station transformer. That's ridiculous. So, anyways, it's another way of saving, to rob Peter to pay Paul, right? So
let's also be clear: the encouragement comes from the state, not from the utility. The utility doesn't like us taking away energy that they could be providing. So, and you know, we're
But
offsetting.
it's also less, but it's also less energy they're buying too.
But we're also offsetting potentially our demand charges and other charges that impact their regulated services. So they should be indifferent, but as we saw in Western Massachusetts, they're not. They have to worry about their system, but unless there's all sorts of other things happening in Situate and Norwell, and maybe that's the problem. We just happen to be last to the game. But again, it just, if what they're saying is our tiny little 500 kilowatt system requires a whole new transformer, it just doesn't seem realistic.
More to come.
I see some hands up, Corey and Laura Burns. I don't know if your hands are left over, or if they are, if you would like to say something.
They're waiting.
Thank you, Tanya. In Hingham, we're looking at school roofs as well, and I wondered, does your business model involve a third party who's able to take advantage of the investment tax credit? How does that work?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we put out an RFP. Sorry, my dog is snoring in the background as much as I keep telling her to get out.
It's very homey.
Hence we are here. So yeah, we did put out an RFP and we received way more than we as a town need. So that's why we're looking at community solar. So, but we are in all cases looking at having a developer do it with no cost up front to us.
Thank you.
I was just
Corey, is your hand still up?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if we've talked to any of the state level reps about that connection issue. I know that other states have different rules on this kind of thing about, you know, who pays the cost for such infrastructure upgrades.
We have not yet. We have started with reaching out to National Grid. So we got the contracts from Select. Select was telling us all about it and was basically like, that's what it is. And we, of course, I was like, no, that's not what it is. Like, let's see give me the documents so that we can look at them. We've looked at them, and then we've reached out to National Grid on a number of different fronts, but this is one of them, to understand what's the foundation for this and to really test it and find out from them what's going on. And then if that's their firm position, we can either talk to the state reps. I'd hate to put in a $500,000 grant request as part of this because it doesn't seem rational. But I think we'll get to the bottom of this, and then, like I said, it's almost like there's 2 zeros added onto it that shouldn't be there.
And we are trying to set up meetings with National Grid. They've been kind of difficult to get a hold of, but we're continuing to try. If anyone has more National Grid contacts, feel free to forward them my way. I will reach out to them, or you can reach out to them. And I think it's almost kind of at this point a free-for-all who can get the meeting first.
Brianna, have you been reaching out to Manuel Sadala?
I've been reaching out to Dennis. Dennis keeps telling me he's going to schedule a meeting the following week. Hopefully this is that week.
Well, we are, we're definitely trying all angles. Mike, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think there's some bad blood between some of these South Shore communities and National Grid, and I don't know if they're trying to stick it to us or what, but from some of the meetings we've had at Hull Light, it's been nasty. They wanted us to pay for a basically for them to do an estimate on what it was going to cost to upgrade the lines to feed us. It's just some crazy stuff that we just said absolutely not. So I think they're getting a little frustrated, and they see their business kind of slowly being eaten away, and I think they're worried.
That's why they got rid of Rhode Island.
Well, I'm sure we could talk about this all night, but just for the sake of time, I am going to suggest we get to the next item in the agenda, which is community aggregation, unless anyone has any final thoughts on the matter.
I think Laura has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that's left over, I believe. So yeah, the next agenda item is community aggregation. Steve, are there any updates you would like to share? We were talking about this earlier today.
Yeah, Brianna and I talked about this today. I called John O'Rourke of Good Energy, and he had not received anything yet from Chris Senior. So I called Brianna, and we talked about it. Brianna actually found a couple of select board meetings that discussed the aggregation program, and had passed the information on, I guess, haven't you? And then anyway, she then subsequently sent a record of the meeting where the select board voted unanimously to pursue to pursue the aggregation program. But I think there must have been another discussion and perhaps a vote after the plan had been developed and discussed. The select board must have discussed and given an okay to authorize Good Energy to go to the next step and submit the plan to the DOER. Did you find that, Brianna?
Yep.
So I think then we should send the record of that meeting also to John O'Rourke.
Yes, I'll forward that to him.
Okay.
So what is the status?
All the information they need, but I'll tell you what. I'll follow up with John O'Rourke tomorrow and make sure he's got this information and gets it to their lawyers. This is very frustrating that we're not moving more rapidly on this.
Well, thank you for shepherding and all you're doing to track it. And Debbie, if you could make sure that that's an action item for Steve. And that's all we can do at this point, Steve. I mean, we're in the same boat with a lot of other towns that have the same frustration.
Right. Yeah, yep. By the way, we had a meeting at the Sustainable South Shore. Debbie participated. I don't think Brianna was there. But we had, people were reporting from several other towns in the South Shore and the same issue. They have their aggregation plan before the DPU and haven't heard anything for a year and a half. So, yeah, it's frustrating.
But isn't this all the same, coming from the same thing? I mean, it's coming from the utility. I have to believe it's coming from the utilities. Their business model is going to hell, and that supply side is sort of a cash cow to them, I think.
Well, yeah, as we mentioned, the Utility Restructuring Act of 1997, was it? Supposedly broke apart the distribution from the generation, and so it shouldn't matter to National Grid whether or not a town has an aggregation program, but apparently maybe it does after all. And I don't know, that was my suspicion, was that there was some lobbying by the utility industry that
but the default is National Grid's plan. I mean, it's not defaulting to some other entity, it's National Grid.
Yeah, well, so, I don't know, that's speculation. I should mention that Joan Moschino actually had conversations with the DPU, and she assures us that no, they're not, there's no hidden agenda there or anything. I don't know. I still wonder about it, but anyways, that's what she said. Okay.
Well, we can only monitor it. So action item to keep on keeping on. And, it'd be one thing if all the other towns were getting theirs approved, but we're all stuck in the same limbo. Any questions on community aggregation? Okay, so microgrid study. We also have been connected with another person at National Grid who is the head of their brain trust looking at grid modernization. And I pitched him on our microgrid study just to see if they have interest. If National Grid is not on board, we cannot do a townwide microgrid. We can't do anything that crosses public streets. So that doesn't mean we can't do a brick grant to try to get batteries for the schools, batteries for the DPW station, school buses, batteries for the police station. That is all very, very doable and able to be done, but that's peanuts compared to what we might be able to get. If we were able to do something big, like a townwide microgrid, we could argue for the geothermal funding, the school roof replacement funding to help us put on the solar, the help on the community aggregation, plus storage, plus other type of renewable energy sources. So there's lots more we could do if National Grid was on board. So we're waiting, we put out a feeler, we're waiting to see what they say back. This was a behind the scenes type of inquiry, but as soon as we get something official, we'll have an official meeting with them and the town to talk about what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do. But this was just, again, trying to connect however we can to find out, are they in or are they not in? So that's where we are on the microgrid. The studies, once we get that from the Mass CEC, we can use those as a foundation for asking for grant money. But definitely the message from FEMA was go big or go home, which we're happy to go big. We have a problem in this town. We have a major problem in this town. And we're the perfect demonstration project, the perfect pilot project. And we have the people to be able to make it happen. It's just, we have to have National Grid, otherwise.
Oops. Looks like we lost Tanya.
She may have lost internet connection. Tanya, are you still here? I will give her a call, but Pat, do you want to start sharing your sustainability slides, and while I just see if I can pull Tanya back on to finish her.
Sure, let me just see if I can get in here. Says I'm disabled. Oh. Okay, so Brianna, it says the host disabled screen sharing, so.
You should have access now.
Okay.
Oh, I think Tanya might be, sorry, Tanya's back on.
Sorry, thanks for jumping in, Brianna. Sorry about that. So anyway, so that's where we are. So as microgrid studies for the DPW station, for the police station, that can be a basis for asking for batteries, money for batteries. It's just, National Grid is a key part of if we can go big and really solve the problems on outages that this town has. Any questions on the microgrid studies or microgrid initiative? Okay, data initiatives, backup generators. Brianna, I don't know if we've had the same type of success as we have with the EVs on this, but I think it's good for Corey to hear. If he's still on.
I have no updates on the backup generators to share tonight.
So Corey, I think the best way for us to do this, again, it could be part of a larger microgrid, tapping into the existing backup generation that so many people have in town. We just don't know who has backup generators and who doesn't. So I don't know if we can ask this question as part of a census or do door-to-door canvassing, but it's just a piece of information that could be very valuable.
Are you, so my apologies if I'm behind a few meetings, but last time we talked, the microgrid was mainly for municipal services. You're talking about residential services in this case.
In this case, it's understanding what the residential service, what the residential backup generation is in town, because that could be an
Okay.
asset as part of a town-wide.
Okay, so if we were going to do microgrid town-wide, okay. Did you guys solve the right-of-way crossing street issue with microgrid, or you're just going to tie into National Grid?
So that's where National Grid has to,
Right.
we have to know, this was a prior discussion, we have to know, is National Grid interested in using us as a demonstration project? Because that's the stage where everything is right now. Or are they not? And they're torn, right? They are a bit schizophrenic on this. On the one hand, they need to do grid modernization. They want to do grid modernization. On the other hand, it is a threat to them.
I mean, conceivably, if you're doing a generator, you're pulling a permit. So I can ask the building inspector if that's something that's data that's, reasonable for you guys to request, or if the privacy issues or whatever. I'm happy to try to make that phone call.
Yeah.
Corey, they post the permits on the town page. You can see who's doing what.
Right. I know that it's public, but there's a little bit of a fine line between like having everything online and accessible and aggregating that information as a service.
Correct.
So I'll do some ethical research and just get back to you on that and see if we can get an easy to understand way to do that.
That'd be great. Thank you. And Corey, if it's okay, we'll put you as an action item so we can follow up on this in our meeting minutes, or we can make it a secret action item.
Yep. Throw rocks at my house as you drive by. That'd be great to remind me.
Okay, so sustainability initiative, Pat, we're going to hear again from Brian Folds on what they're doing for sustainability, but have you made any progress on that?
Well, basically, at the time that I did my presentation, I originally spoke about this in February, and then we were supposed to talk about it a couple of times, and there hasn't been time on the agenda. Really where I'm at is looking for some guidance from people. I have a lot of some slides. I've looked at Concord's plan. I think Brian's coming back next month, Brianna, to talk about their sustainability plan.
Yeah.
Is that correct? So I actually did a little case study on Concord, and in interest of time, since it's 9:30 at this point, I won't take everybody through it. But one of the highlights of their plan is that they discovered that 60% of the greenhouse gases that were produced in Concord were residential generated. So that's why things like electrify everything and trying to get consumers educated about using alternate ways of not producing carbon is very important to the community. And I think in theirs, the statistic was only 4% of the greenhouse gases produced were coming from the municipal sector. So, there's a lot of data that they've done. They've been working on this for 7 years or something. I'm trying to research from people that have gotten into this area in terms of a holistic plan. How did they get there? Brian kind of referenced he was a petitioner. I'm not sure what that meant. I reached out to Diane Kennedy and asked her, is there sort of a prescribed way to approach this? She didn't really know either. So I guess one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that our charter sort of talks around enabling, say, sustainability as an outcome of, turning things into an alternative energy source, energy efficiency, et cetera. However, it is not our prescribed charter to go after sustainability with the big S, such that you would be looking at a natural resource preservation, which would get into, Steve Girardi, water, different things like that, where other committees are participating. So my question is sort of back to this committee is, do you have thoughts about what this committee does in terms of sustainability and broadening that? Should we pursue that with the select board and the town and say, we'd like to have a broader charter? Should we stay in the swim lane that we're in, continue to do the stuff that is really important in terms of energy. And I think what we'll learn as Brian comes to the table next month is their whole thing evolved into what is now a very structured organization. So they have an oversight with 2 different types of committees. And I think what may make sense, and this is just food for thought, is that there's some sort of a committee that goes out and does a working group to come up with a plan, propose some types of structures that could work for Cohasset around these different committees, and then come back and, you know, look at what might work. And I think ultimately what I would love to see is that this town embraces a real plan around all the aspects of sustainability that we've talked about before, and looks at a path forward. So whether that's a 5-year or 10-year or whatever plan, different communities have done everything from 2020 to 2030 and 2050 and beyond in terms of a climate action plan and all the aspects of that. So I just think that I don't know exactly the right way to move forward, but I'd love to hear from everybody here if they have, and Corey, Sam, if he's still on. And I don't know, Laura, your role in Hingham, but I'd love to hear from other people that have some town government experience in terms of what they would see the path forward looking like.
Well, I'm glad Laura's hand is up because I think she has some good insights, as does Steve. So Laura, do you want to start? And then Steve?
Sure. I'm a former selectman in Hingham, and I'm currently was just elected to the light board. And we were inspired also by Concord's experience, and we studied what they did. When Brian says he was a petitioner, that means that he was one of 10 people presenting an article to town meeting to create this climate action plan process. We did exactly the same thing, except that we asked the Board of Selectmen to sponsor an article at town meeting to create a committee to create a climate action plan. And what they did was they created a climate action plan task force to create the article for town meeting. You know how that is. And they did that. It happened a year later than we thought it should have. We only have so many years, so that was sad. But at last town meeting, we did create the climate action plan task force, which has on it representatives of the school department, the planning department, all the various town committees, all in one place to come up with a plan that would then describe what all those entities would do, hopefully. And we also included some funding to hire a consultant from MAPC to help us do it. So we haven't done it yet, but we were trying to do what Concord did.
Thanks.
Great. Steve, did you have something to add? Thank you, Laura, and thank you for joining our meeting tonight.
Did somebody else have some comments on this?
I'd raised my hand, but it was just to encourage Laura to tell us a story about net zero, which she did very well. So I'm very glad. I think that would be a very good model for us to follow. But before I go here,
Steve,
I'm sorry.
You mentioned Hingham Net Zero, and I left that part out, which is we began this process by creating a community group of climate activists. And that our first goal was to get the town to create a climate action plan. So without a group of 20 to 30 active people in the community, I don't know if we would have succeeded. But we just kept up the pressure until we got there. But it required some community organization.
Great, thank you.
So kind of off topic here, but before we close, I want to make sure I give a shout out to Tanya for representing Cohasset at the Sustainable South Shore meeting. She gave a tremendous presentation explaining all the great things that we're doing, and now people all around the South Shore know about what we're doing. So we got to really live up to her story. So thank you, Tanya.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for the invitation. And Laura, it was so nice to meet you there and others. So it was a pleasure for sure. Any business not known in advance?
Actually, Tanya, you should have Brianna explain her trip to Hingham on Wednesday. I figured it'd be 45 minutes. We had to spend 2 hours with Brianna and Laura at Hingham Light. Take it away, Brianna. Come on.
Yeah, it was great. I don't want to keep everyone, but basically Steve got to take us on a tour, and we saw the battery in Hingham at the light plant, and then we also went across the street and we saw the solar canopy at the MBTA station. I drove around to Nantasket Junction after, and I looked at the other one as well. And so that was great. We saw how it ties to the tie grid solar.
Yeah.
And it was really great. They were doing a lockout tagout procedure, and so we saw them actually take the batteries out of the storage container, and I got to see all the engineering stuff about it. It was awesome to see, especially because that doesn't happen every day. And so I don't know, you could request a tour, but I think it's kind of great timing that we were able to be there. I don't know the next time they are even going to take the batteries out of the system. Something needed to be repaired, like in it.
Hopefully never.
Exactly.
Yes. And it's kind of like a pilot program that's happening in Hingham right now, and it works really well with the municipal light plant. But it's something, if we were cooperating with National Grid and our partnerships and everything, it's something Cohasset could do. So I kind of reached out to Laura, and she provided me a lot of information. And then Steve heard I was asking about it, and they were like, "Let's go on a tour." And so we all went there yesterday. And that was great. And it did take 2 hours, which was just amazing. You forgot it was like 90 degrees out.
Yeah. Oh, it was a good learning lesson. Honestly, you're not going to see that with Brianna and Laura. So you're not going to see that. That's playing the lottery. So, but they guys saw the inner working of the containers, and the guys actually hooded up with their suits, taking the battery out, replacing temperature probes, and they saw how it all ties in with the protection into the HMLP electric distribution system. So it was really good.
Something as we think about our BRIC grant, hopefully Hingham will be able to share some of the pricing with us so that we understand what we need to ask for funding. And operational experience. I would think your operational experience is going to be similar to what a battery in Cohasset might also be able to do and provide with respect to value.
So the person to ask about that is named Steve Girardi.
I think I know him.
Yep, it's me.
Find his phone number.
If anybody wants a tour of it, the general manager does not mind. It had to be a small group. So if anybody's interested, it really is a kind of good experience. Everybody had fun on Wednesday. It was hot. I was sweating, but we all forgot about the sweats. So, we don't mind doing the canopies and stuff, because you know what, if you want to learn, just come next door. That's all.
Well, Hingham definitely is an inspiration. So, and as are other surrounding towns, but it's definitely good to have some of those experts on our team and attending our meetings. So thank you to everybody. Any other business before we close up?
Can I just ask a question? And it may be too long and we should just push it aside for another day. But if we were successful with electrical municipalization, then a lot of these issues we're talking about would be moot, right? We would be in control of internal exchanges between schools and things, right? Because we would control it.
I know Laura could definitely speak on this, but I could tell you from working at HMLP that I know so many of our customers on a personal note, and especially forget the engineering side, just on the solar side. I've been to every home. I got to meet families, kids. I get emails and text messages of what their solar production is doing, like literally weekly. So it's a different, and and the thing is, the Hingham residents have a say through the light board, the light plan. So everybody has a special interest, right, Laura? It's a good way to put it.
But we wouldn't have constraints about crossing roads or anything like that, right? I mean,
No.
so I guess
Well, you have to ask the Board of Selectmen before you cross a road. So,
Correct.
but so my question is, if we, really put, if we're going to keep running up against this and it's holding us back, the process of electrical municipalization, if I'm massacring it, I mean, how long realistically would that take? And is that something maybe we should really put a lot of effort in so that we could gain control and get ourselves out of this mess?
it took 7 years for Hingham to municipalize our water company.
Was that because of its cycles of the annual town meeting and things like that, or was it just not?
No. It was created with a special act of the legislature in 1890 that gave Hingham the right to buy it whenever we wanted. So that was not a dispute, which it might be with National Grid. I don't know. But the dispute was about what the price was. It took us 7 years to settle that in the courts.
Understand, and I haven't seen documentation on this, that we could approach National Grid and the price is already set. And it's basically the cost of replacement, full replacement cost. So we'd have to buy a crappy old system at the price of a new system if we wanted to become our own municipal light company. And I believe that's legislated. So, or at least it's part of the regulations, it's codified somewhere. So I think these are questions that we need to pursue. And I think we also need to think about whether it solves, how many of the outages does it solve? Because the reality is we're still at the end of the line, just like Hull is at the end of the line and Hingham is almost at the end of the line. And you guys have the same type of reliability issues we have from the upstream problems. So I think there's a lot to think about, Debbie, but I do agree that this is something in our I think it should be an ongoing active inquiry now that we have the funding and can proceed with hiring a consultant to look at that as an option. Because regardless of what we do, if National Grid steps up and says, yes, we want to use you as a demonstration project, we still have to go to the select board and explain to them why that's better than becoming our own light company, if that's what we decide. So I look at municipalization as being, I don't want to say it's a bogey, but it is an alternative that we have been told to look at very seriously by our select board. So it is on our tasks. We have some funding to hire consultants to look at that. We've got great neighbors who attend our meetings to help us think through that. So it definitely has to be action going forward. And I think starting in the fall, we should put a lot more effort into it. And by then we'll have a better idea about where National Grid is.
Could I just make a little observation, if you guys don't mind, is just, one of the challenges that you guys face is a lot of what's been done already is in the structure of municipal light plants, and that's not our structure. So there's going to be always, this frustration where we're trying to apply, it's a square peg round hole problem. But I think that the electric school bus situation is a really good case study in a partnership between municipality and private enterprise to bring something forward. So, changing the approach slightly to say, how can we incentivize National Grid to do what we want to do? Is it their ability to put installations on town land or have tax abatements, or is there some structure that we can put in place on the municipal level that encourages National Grid to do privately what we'd like them to do anyway? Rather than us trying to wrestle control from them, how do we incentivize them to behave in certain ways? And that may also include reaching out to our state representatives to say, hey, what's being worked on right now that can incentivize this? Because we understand there's there's a monetary aspect here that's very real. I mean, it's either it's going to cost us a lot of money to try to buy these poles, as Tanya said, or it's going to cost National Grid a lot of money, and they've got a fiduciary responsibility to their investors as well. So how do we, this really needs to be thought of from a different approach. I think we can learn from municipalities about what the outcome can be, but the path is there's going to be a lot of creative forging of a new path to get to that final outcome. Does that make sense at all?
Totally makes sense. And this is why we've been really pushing on the microgrids, because we can, and this was the initial pitch to Brian Gemmell at National Grid, which is, we are the perfect demonstration project for you. You don't know yet what your business model is. You don't know what you can do, what you can't do, what you want to do, what you don't want to do. So use us, fully funded by a FEMA grant, use us to develop a microgrid to figure it out. And then you're better prepared to go to the DPU and say to them, here's what we want. We might want a microgrid tariff. Here's what we'll do for it. And it's a defensive mechanism for them. So that was our pitch. And frankly, at that point, we don't care, because we've got 3 switches set up and can island ourselves out as soon as there's an upstream problem. We still have an issue if there's an in-house problem, in-community problem, but if we separate ourselves up into, say, 5 to 7 microgrids within the muni grid, we can isolate the problem so it doesn't impact everybody else. So that is why the microgrid concept has been our focus, because I think it does take that path that you've identified, and it's real and we can do it. But if National Grid just says no, we're limited. We're limited to areas that don't cross a public right of way, which actually there are quite a lot, but we're still limited. Steve, did you want to say something?
Who, me?
Yeah, sorry, you popped up on my screen, even though you were on mute, so I didn't know if you.
Oh, nope. I'm good.
Okay. All right. Okay. As always, amazing meeting. Thank you for putting up with the tiny little dog who snores like a big bear, and for all of your comments and questions and participation, and Brianna for all of your help in bringing these great speakers to. If there's nothing more, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Pat made the motion and Steve seconded it, and we do not have to do a roll call vote for this. Everybody in favor, just raise your hand.
Mike Schmidt, aye.
Tony Bodell, aye. We may as well do roll call, I guess.
Steve Winter, aye.
Gooding, aye.
All right, and thank you, Debbie, again, and thank you to our guests for joining us. You are great additions to this meeting. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All righty. Bye, everybody.